Liebe Zuschauer, herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und heute wird es um folgende Themen gehen. Der französische Präsident Macron spricht von NATO-Bodentruppen in der Ukraine. Wann ist die rote Linie einer direkten Kriegsbeteiligung überschritten? Transnistrien stellt sich offiziell unter den Schutz Russlands. Rollte nun die russische Offensive auf Odessa an? US-Außenpolitik setzt auf Krieg und Rüstung statt auf Diplomatie. Welchen Einfluss hat der militärisch-industrielle Komplex auf die US-Politik? Und nachgefragt bei Scott Ritter, was muss Deutschland tun, um aus EU und NATO auszutreten? Anfang der Woche hat der französische Präsident Emmanuel Macron geäußert, dass der Westen alles, was notwendig ist, tun werde, um zu verhindern, dass Russland den Ukraine-Krieg gewinnen werde. Auch den Einsatz von NATO-Bodentruppen schloss Macron explizit nicht aus. Seine Äußerungen lösten einen Aufschrei im Westen aus. Schnell beeilten sich zahlreiche NATO-Mitglieder wie die USA, Großbritannien und auch Deutschland klarzustellen, dass sie natürlich nicht planen, Soldaten in die Ukraine zu entsenden. Bundeskanzler Olaf Scholz betonte, es würden keine Soldaten von einem EU- oder NATO-Staat in die Ukraine entsandt werden. Was sagst du zu der ganzen Debatte, Scott? Sind es nur politische Luftschlösser von Macron, der versucht, sich in Szene zu setzen? Oder wären tatsächlich Pläne vom Westen entworfen, NATO-Soldaten in der Ukraine einzusetzen?
Well, first of all, there already are NATO soldiers in Ukraine. Numerous press accounts have said that there are special operations forces. The United States has acknowledged that there are special forces in Ukraine. The British have their Special Air Service in Ukraine, in numbers, by the way. I wouldn't be surprised if Germany had some special forces in Ukraine, and we know that France has special forces in Ukraine. So the idea that there aren't any Western boots on the ground is just an absurdity, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is conventional combat power. And the plan that Macron was trying to foist onto NATO was for individual NATO nations to sign security agreements with Ukraine on a unilateral basis and then provide forces, combat forces to Ukraine that wouldn't go to the front line, but would be used for rear area security, border screening, etc., in an effort to free up Ukrainian forces currently tied down in those roles so that they could go to the front line. That's what he was trying to push. I think he was quickly put in his place by people who recognize the insanity of such an action. Russia has made it clear that if you put combat troops on the ground, conventional combat troops, that's a red line, and that these troops would be subjected to attack, and more than likely the decision-making centers associated with these troops would likewise be attacked and destroyed. So just to make it clear for your German audience, if the German parliament approved an application by the chancellor to deploy German combat troops on Ukrainian soil, the Russians would not only kill every single one of those Germans, but they would probably destroy Berlin in the process. That's what happens when you go to war. I know that there's not too many Germans alive today who remember the last time Germany went to war, but that's the reality of war, especially when you lose. And so this is what happens. So fortunately, common sense has prevailed, but we also have to reflect on the fact that NATO and Europe and the United States have dug themselves into quite the hole here. They've backed themselves into the political corner with their own rhetoric, talking about an existential struggle with Russia, the absolute necessity to prevail in this conflict, to defeat Russia. Well, Russia's not being defeated. And so what happens when everything that you said must happen and for your survival doesn't happen? You're either exposed as a liar, which they are, or you're compelled to take action that appears to be on par with the threat that you've described. And, I think you're going to see as the weeks advance, NATO is going to be put under even more pressure because the Ukrainians, frankly speaking, are collapsing at the front line. There will be a very precipitous moment in the coming weeks where combat cohesion disappears totally and Russia will be moving forward unabated. And NATO will be left with the inability to fantasize about victory because there won't be a Ukrainian military to even fantasize about.
Die russische Reaktion auf Macrons Vorstoß fiel, wie du schon sagtest, Scott, deutlich aus. Der Vorsitzende des Komitees für Außenpolitik des russischen Föderationsrates, Konstantin Kosatschow, warnte den Westen vor einem katastrophalen Szenario, wenn tatsächlich NATO-Soldaten in der Ukraine eingesetzt würden. Kosatschow sprach von einer roten Linie, womit die NATO nicht länger nur ein Kriegsunterstützer wäre, sondern direkte Kriegspartei. Und auch Kreml-Sprecher Dmitri Peskow betonte, dass in einem solchen Fall ein Krieg Russlands gegen die NATO unvermeidbar wäre. Vergangene Woche jedoch hatte der russische General Sergei Rutskoi nach der Einnahme Awdejewkas berichtet, als Söldner getarnte NATO-Soldaten nehmen an den militärischen Operationen teil. Sie kontrollieren Luftabwehrsysteme, operativ-taktische Raketen und Mehrfachraketenwerfer und gehen in Angriffskommandos. Was fehlt dann eigentlich noch, bis die von Moskau kommunizierte rote Linie zur direkten Kriegspartei überschritten wird?
I think the standard is conventional military units in their totality. Poland has apparently formed units, but they, immediately get what the term is sheep-dipped, turned into Ukrainian units. But if Polish units went to Ukraine as Polish units under the Polish flag, that would be a red line. If French units went to Ukraine as French units under the French flag, that would be a red line. Right now, yes, we have mercenaries, we have contractors, we have people operating in a covert status, doing exactly what the Russian general spoke of. You need to understand that Ukraine has suffered horrendous casualties, and these casualties aren't just the frontline units, but the support units as well. And when the United States and Europe provides Ukraine with advanced weapon systems, for instance, air defense systems that require months to train a Western operator, Ukraine doesn't have anybody qualified to operate these systems, and they need them now, right now. They don't need them months from now. And so these systems are deployed to Ukraine, and they are operated either in totality or at least under the supervision of Western specialists, more than likely people who have left active duty either temporarily or permanently or under some form of contractual obligation to Ukraine just for legal purposes. But at the end of the day, when this contract ends, they'll return to the United States or their European nation, and they'll resume their career as an active duty military professional. But this is the only option available to have this equipment functioning. The same thing when you provide HIMARS systems, and ATACMS missiles. The Ukrainians simply lack the personnel who are qualified to operate these systems. And so they must come from somewhere, and they come from the West.
Kannst du bitte eine offene und ehrliche Einschätzung geben, Scott? Wenn der französische Präsident Macron sagt, man werde alles, was notwendig ist, tun, um zu verhindern, dass Russland den Ukraine-Krieg gewinnen werde, und wenn gleichzeitig Russland vor einem katastrophalen Szenario warnt und vor einer finalen roten Linie warnt, und denken wir auch an die ganze Kriegsvorbereitung der NATO, die Manöver, die Ankündigungen an die Bevölkerung. Wie nah stehen wir vor einem Krieg zwischen der NATO und Russland? Und wie würde so ein Krieg ablaufen? Das NATO-Mitglied Litauen hat bereits angedeutet, dass die russische Exklave Kaliningrad als erstes neutralisiert werden würde.
Well, let me just make it clear to Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia that they would be neutralized long before Kaliningrad would be neutralized. They're pathetically small militaries. are backed up by pathetically inadequate NATO forces. And Russia would not be doing a special military operation against them. If Russia were compelled to go to war against the Baltic republics, it would lead to the total destruction of the Baltic republics. But sometimes poodles have to be bitten by the Rottweiler to learn their lesson. And so the Baltic poodles will continue to bark, but Russia really doesn't care about them. It is not worried about them. Macron is a politician who, again, has backed himself into a rhetorical corner, just like every other Western politician. And so he says absurdities such as, we will do whatever it takes. Well, the answer, Macron, is that the only way you stop Russia from winning in Ukraine is to engage in a nuclear conflict with Russia that destroys Russia. But that's a double-edged sword because you will be destroyed as well. Vladimir Putin and other Russian officials have talked about the potential of conflict with NATO. And Putin has said that, if red lines are crossed, then NATO will be a party. And he understands what Article 5 is. He understands what collective defense is. So does Russia. He's also said that NATO in its totality possesses tremendous military capabilities that are larger than Russia's, although some people would argue that last point. And that Russia just isn't going to wait around for NATO to mobilize its superior power, that if NATO makes a decision to engage in armed conflict with Russia, Russia will respect that decision, which means that Russia will instantly strike all NATO decision-making centers and the decision-making centers of the nations that are taking the lead in a conflict with Russia. And while these initial strikes may be conventional in nature, if NATO wants to up the ante to nuclear capability, then Russia will be more than happy to do that. And as Putin has pointed out, Russia has a distinct advantage in nuclear weapons. And so it would be the end of NATO, the end of Europe, and the end of anybody who wanted to go to war with Russia. So now you have to bring yourself back into Macron's shoes, whatever it takes. Does the average French citizen understand that Macron is playing with their lives? Do the Germans understand this? Because Germans say, well, that's not us. Yes, it is. Because you're part of NATO, you idiots. You've allowed yourself to be tied to this madman named Macron. So his words will take you to war and you will die. If you live in the Netherlands, you will die. All of NATO will die. But we don't want this. Then don't join NATO. But you have a NATO leader who is mouthing off in an irresponsible manner about doing whatever it takes to defeat Russia. And that means that Russia will do whatever it takes to ensure that that defeat never happens. And that means the destruction of all of Europe.
In unserem Interview vergangene Woche sprachen wir über den möglichen Plan Russlands, Odessa in der kommenden Offensive einzunehmen. Als entscheidenden Schritt dorthin nanntest du die Vereinigung mit den Militärkräften Transnistriens. Am Mittwoch hat Transnistrien bekannt gegeben, dass es Moskau um Schutz bittet. Welche geopolitischen Auswirkungen hat der Beschluss Transnistriens? Ist das die Ouvertüre für die von dir skizzierte Offensive gegen Odessa? Wird Transnistrien ein Teil Russlands werden, wie es mit den Volksrepubliken Donetsk und Lugansk passiert ist?
I think we should make this as easy as possible. Russia has already said that it treats Transnistria as an extension of Russia, and it's warned that a nation that attacks Transnistria is attacking Russia and will be held accountable in that way. The Transnistrian government is undertaking actions that put them on a path towards being absorbed by Russia, first by seeking a collective security arrangement similar to that which Russia undertook with Lugansk and Donetsk prior to the special military operation. And then they will seek the political unification with Russia as a territory of the Russian Federation. Russia will not allow a territory of the Russian Federation like Transnistria to become a new Kaliningrad, isolated by, surrounded by NATO members, which means that the fate of Odessa has already been decided. Odessa will be taken, and there will be a land bridge connecting Transnistria with the rest of Russia. And I think we can take that to the bank.
Transnistrien soll über die größte Konzentration von Beständen an sowjetischen Waffen und Munition verfügen. Deshalb hatte die Ukraine in den vergangenen 2 Jahren einen gierigen Blick auf dieses schmale Stück Land geworfen. Was könnten die Waffen aus Transnistrien im Krieg in der Ukraine bewirken? Welche militärische Macht hat Russland in Transnistrien konzentriert und könnte es die Niederlage der Ukraine beschleunigen?
First of all, Ukraine will never gain access to any of the weapons that are contained in Transnistria. They don't have the military force necessary to seize these weapons. And even if they were able to gain access to the ammunition depots in question, these depots would be blown in place. It would be one of the largest explosions that Europe has ever experienced. And even if they somehow salvage some of these munitions, they're old munitions. Many of them are beyond their life expectancy. And if Russia takes over Transnistria, these weapons will be disposed of properly, either blown in place or shipped to a disposal area and blown up. It's a fantasy. It's a NATO fantasy that somehow Ukraine's ammunition problems could be resolved by gaining access to these ammunition dumps. There's not a single military professional who believes that.
Du sprichst davon, dass die russischen Pläne zur Einnahme Odessas bereits in die Wege geleitet wurden. Kann die Ukraine oder kann der Westen etwas tun, um eine russische Offensive auf Transnistrien oder Odessa zu stoppen?
The short answer is no. There's nothing that they can do. They can, they would have to put forces on the ground. But I think people need to reflect on certain realities. This isn't a board game where you can move pieces around on a map willy-nilly wherever your finger decides to put them. To move a military unit requires transportation, and it requires logistics. And that unit, when it deploys someplace, has to be sustained logistically, which means you either have to forward deploy the ammunition, the fuel, the food, everything they need deployed, or you have to have a line of communications from existing depots supplying them. Either way, you become vulnerable. If you forward deploy, those become targets. Russia hits the targets. The units now have no sustainability. They die. If they're coming from a rear area, a depot, that depot will be struck. And now they're cut off and they're going to die. NATO is being stressed right now like it's never been stressed in a long time. And I'm not talking about potential conflict with Russia. NATO's running the largest exercise since the 1980s. And this exercise is very stressful to NATO because they're being asked to do things that they haven't done. Move large numbers of troops, sustain large numbers of troops, come up with the gasoline necessary to move these large numbers of troops. When these troops go to the munitions range, to have the ammunition available to use for training. This isn't stuff that they just snapped their fingers and make happen. They had to plan for this months in advance, years in advance to accumulate this capability. They're stressed. The idea now that the NATO could somehow transition into a wartime footing in Moldova, which there's no connectivity. How do you take an M1A1 Abrams tank or a Leopard tank or a Leclerc tank or a Challenger tank to Odessa? Do you go through Moldova? Have you looked at Moldova's roads? Can Moldova's roads handle this traffic? Do they have bridges capable of handling the combined weight of a main battle tank and a heavy equipment transport vehicle? And the answer is no. So there's literally nothing the West can do. They can talk about putting a no-fly zone over, but again, that's a direct war with Russia. Russia is not going to sit back and let that happen, and it's an unsustainable thing. The airplanes would be operating within the envelope of Russian air defense, and the airfields would be targeted by Russian missiles to which the West has no air defense answer. So the bottom line is there's nothing the West can do. If Russia wants Odessa, and it appears that Russia does want Odessa, then Russia will take Odessa.
Was ist mit dem Staudamm in der Nähe von Odessa? Bereits in der Vergangenheit hatte Kiew damit gedroht, den ganzen Landstrich zu überfluten, falls die russischen Streitkräfte die Region Odessa angreifen würden. Könnte eine solche Überschwemmung die russische Offensive verlangsamen? Könnte sie Zeit für eine mögliche ukrainische Aktion gewinnen? Und welche Pläne könnte Moskau wohl haben, um die Sprengung des Staudamms zu verhindern?
Well, I mean, throughout history, especially modern history, people have talked about blowing up dams to create water barriers. You saw the Germans did that in the Ruhr Valley as Allied forces advanced. There was, a talk of doing it elsewhere. We saw the Ukrainians did blow a dam on the Dnieper River. So yes, the Ukrainians could blow a dam if they wanted to. And yes, that would cause problems. But war is full of problems. All problems have a solution, and Russia is a professional military that will have solutions to whatever problems arise. If Russia deems that the blowing of a dam represents a huge strategic problem, then I'm sure Russia can come up with plans to seize the dam, and secure it, and until a Russian armored column can marry up with that force. Again, I'm not a Russian general. Let them do the planning, but if that's something Ukraine can do. They always have that option.
Die US Army hat in ihrem frisch herausgegebenen Handbuch Russland als Feind tituliert. Offenbar bereitet sich der gesamte Militärapparat der Vereinigten Staaten darauf vor, seine militärische Konzeption gegen Russland auszurichten. Und das, obwohl der Sprecher des Nationalen Sicherheitsrates der USA, John Kirby, erst Mitte Februar betont hatte, dass Russland keine direkte Bedrohung darstelle. Scott, du bist ein ehemaliger Marinesoldat, nicht von der US Army, wie du gerne betonst, aber was bedeutet es, wenn die US Army Russland als Feind auffasst? Betrifft das auch andere Truppenteile, wie etwa die Luftwaffe oder deine Marines? Und was sagst du als ehemaliger US-Soldat zu dieser politischen und militärischen Ausrichtung deines Landes?
Well, first of all, the Army doesn't undertake unilateral actions. And so if the Army is considering Russia to be the enemy, then some sort of directive has come down from above in Department of Defense that has said you need to prepare for the potential of a war against Russia, which means that now focus will be put on Russian tactics, Russian equipment, coming up with force structures, and our own tactics, our own operations that are designed to defeat the Russian enemy on the battlefield. When I was in the Marine Corps, the Soviet Union was the enemy. And all we did is train to fight a Soviet enemy. I briefed all of my units on Soviet artillery capabilities. We designed our exercises around Soviet capabilities. We trained very realistically so that if we ever had to go to war against the Soviet Union, we wouldn't be taken by surprise. We would already be familiar with what needs to be done. And that's just the way the military works. I think as a former Marine, I think it's imperative that the U.S. military be prepared to prevail in combat against any potential enemy. And so I don't have a problem with the United States preparing to fight anybody. What I do have a problem with is policies that push us in the direction of war. Right now we have bad relations with Russia. That's our fault, almost exclusively. But the military isn't a policy-making branch. It's policy implementation. And so the military will do what they're told to do, and nobody should hold that against the military. Because I can guarantee you that the Russians are preparing to fight the United States. Although the Russian government doesn't want to view America as its enemy. This isn't an issue of the military. Let the military do what the military does. This is an issue of governments and diplomats. Now that we know that both of our armies are preparing for war, shouldn't we be smart enough to do everything possible to avoid such a conflict? In many ways, I think it's better that the U.S. military is preparing for a conflict with Russia because it takes uncertainty out of the equation. If we're not preparing for war with Russia, then people will be lulled into a false sense of complacency when it comes to evaluating America's aggressive diplomatic stance against Russia. At least now we're being honest to say, no, we are preparing for a war with Russia. And so now it should be a wake-up call to all Americans that, left unchecked, our policy is leading us towards confrontation with an enemy that we may not be able to beat. And if we go into full-scale conflict, we'll use nuclear weapons that will destroy us all. So at least we brought some clarity to the problem. And now it's up to the American people to put pressure on their elected representatives to change this policy, to alter the direction that we're on. And having the military preparing for war against Russia is a great wake-up call. So in some ways, I thank the Pentagon for helping achieve this level of clarity.
Lass uns beim Thema US-Militärkomplex bleiben. Wir haben eine spannende Zuschauerfrage zugeschickt bekommen, die wir dir gerne weiterleiten. Kannst du, Scott, Stellung beziehen zu dem Einfluss des militärisch-industriellen Komplexes der USA auf die Ausrichtung der US-Politik? So hatte US-Präsident Dwight D. Eisenhower in seiner Abschiedsrede vom 17. Januar 1961 ausdrücklich vor den Verflechtungen und Einflüssen des militärisch-industriellen Komplexes in den USA gewarnt. Eisenhower, der selbst einst Generalstabschef der Armee war, sah den militärisch-industriellen Komplex als eine Gefahr für die demokratischen Institutionen und die Demokratie an. Durch die Einwirkung dieses Komplexes auf Sozial- und Wirtschaftspolitik könnte die politische Führung dazu veranlasst werden, Konflikte eher militärisch als politisch lösen zu wollen und damit als verlängerter Arm der Rüstungsindustrie zu agieren. Wie bewertest du die Rolle des militärisch-industriellen Komplexes innerhalb der USA? Nimmt er direkten Einfluss auf die US-Außenpolitik?
Well, one only has to take a look at the two big conflicts that are taking place today and one conflict that's looming over the horizon. Ukraine is a problem that could be resolved diplomatically. We know this because it was ready to be resolved diplomatically back in March and April of 2022. But instead, we engaged in a lend-lease type operation, $48 billion. It's turned into something much larger over time, where we have opted to supply weaponry. But now we're being told that this isn't necessarily to help Ukraine, but to help American industry. Straight up, Victoria Nuland has said that this is about jobs in America. This is about, money going to American companies, et cetera. That's what Dwight Eisenhower is worried about. Right now, we have a situation where there could be a diplomatic solution to the Ukrainian problem, but instead, we've allowed the military-industrial complex, it's actually the military-industrial congressional complex, to hijack policies so that the only solution being considered is a military solution. And it's being pursued even though everybody knows that Ukraine is going to lose this war, because it's not about helping Ukraine win the war. It's about creating a vehicle that allows the U.S. Defense industry to continue to produce weapons and generate a profit. We see the same thing with Israel. We could have sought a ceasefire a long time ago, demanded a ceasefire, but instead we're engaged in, a policy that has us providing unfettered military support to the Israeli government. Bombs are flowing in as if they were candy. The same thing with other munitions, weapon systems, et cetera. And who benefits from this? The military-industrial complex, the military-industrial congressional complex. And now we see these same people posturing about a potential conflict with Iran, talking about the need to get production up to speed in anticipation of this. But understand that once they start producing the weapons, that means that the policy decision has already been made to go to war against China. And so diplomacy plays no role in this. It appears that the American diplomat exists simply to it'd be like a purchasing agent for the military-industrial complex to go out and promote war, promote chaos, promote anarchy, promote death, promote destruction, so that American weapons can be justified for being used. And this is a human tragedy. It's bad policy. It's bad for the world. It's bad for America. It's bad for humanity.
In unserem letzten Interview hast du, Scott, deutliche Worte an das deutsche Volk gerichtet. Deutschland müsse aus der EU und der NATO austreten und sich den BRICS zuwenden. Unser Publikum fragt nun, wie das konkret politisch möglich sein kann. Schließlich befinden sich in Deutschland Tausende von US-Soldaten, die im Falle eines NATO-Austritts ausgewiesen werden müssten. Zudem sind viele deutsche Monopolunternehmen eng verbunden mit dem US-Kapital und werden zum Teil sogar transatlantisch gesteuert. Würde ein Bruch mit der NATO nicht unvermeidlich mit einem radikalen Bruch mit den USA zusammenfallen? Kann Deutschland sich das Frankreich der 1960er Jahre zum Vorbild nehmen, als Präsident Charles de Gaulle entschied, Frankreich aus der militärischen Struktur der NATO zurückzuziehen? Oder noch konkreter gefragt, welche Schritte wären notwendig, national wie international, damit Deutschland die NATO verlassen könnte?
Well, it's actually very simple. Take control of your government. Step one. Put people in power that put Germany first. Step two. Step three, withdraw from NATO. It's easy, guys. Withdraw from NATO. Say, I quit. Step four, send letters to the United States terminating the status of forces agreement and saying that the troops are no longer welcome on German soil and they should leave. That there will be, you no longer authorize American troops to carry out military exercises. You deny American aircraft any overflight that isn't directly related to the withdrawal of American forces. That there will be you withdraw Germany from NATO. You have every German officer assigned to a NATO function come home. You stop funding NATO. You simply stop sending money to NATO. You don't participate in NATO. That's how you do it. You call up Russia and say, turn on the gas line. The remaining Nord Stream gas line, turn it on. You go to China, Russia, and you say, we're applying for BRICS membership. And you tell Russia that you're interested in resuming the full scope and scale of economic interaction. You tell the same thing to China. Rather than de-risking German companies in China, you expand German companies in China. It's really very easy. It's like the nose on your face. The path is there. The question is, do you have the courage to do it? Do you have the courage to tell America we don't want to be a part of you anymore? To tell NATO that you're a poison pill? Now, if the European Union wants to make a stink, then you withdraw from the European Union. But I don't think they want to make a stink, because if you withdraw from the European Union is over. That's the kind of leverage you have, Germany. You see what's happening in the United States, where we have the Republicans are in control of the House of Representatives, and they're saying no to everybody. And everybody's angry at them, but they can't do anything about it. Yes, if you withdrew from NATO, if you kicked the United States out, people would be mad at you, but what can they do about it? Because you hold them in the palm of your hand. You're not Greece. You're not Hungary. You're not some pathetic little minor European country. You're Germany. Without you, there is no European Union. Without you, there is no euro. Germany could transition to the mark and survive. Europe would dissolve, because without the euro, their economy ceases to function. Maybe France can resurrect a weak franc. Maybe Italy can breathe life into the lira. But all the rest of Europe goes away, collapses, because they bought into the euro. So Germany has a lot more power than they think. But Germany needs to grow up, needs to behave as an adult. So there's the answer. The question is, what are you going to do about it?
Liebe Zuschauer, wir sagen herzlichen Dank an Scott Ritter für seine Zeit und umfassenden Analysen. Und auch an euch, wie immer, vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, teilt unser Video breit in den sozialen Medien und abonniert unbedingt unseren Kanal Gegenpol. Folgt uns auch auf den Plattformen Odyssey und X. Und wenn ihr mal Fragen habt, die wir unbedingt an Scott Ritter stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns doch in die Kommentare. Ich sage Tschüss und bis nächste Woche bei Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter.